Gigabyte have made some strange choices with the Aorus 17 gaming laptop. I've got two different configurations of Aorus 17 to review. Both have an Intel Core i7-12700H CPU, but the one with NVIDIA RTX 3070 Ti graphics has DDR4 memory, while the higher tier 3080 Ti model has newer DDR5 memory, though both have the same 17.3-inch 1080p 360Hz screen. I'm going to focus most of this review on the lower tier 3070 Ti model, as honestly, I think it makes the most sense for most people. But that said, we will also look at the higher spec 3080 Ti option so that you can see the differences. The entire laptop seems to have a black plastic finish, and I thought the overall build quality was good. Despite the black finish, it seemed fairly resistant to fingerprints, at least compared to others like, say, the Razer Blade. There's some flex to the keyboard, but this wasn't a problem during normal use. It felt sturdy. There's a little flex to the lid, but the hinges also felt sturdy, and there was only an extremely small amount of screen wobble when typing. I found the lid easy to open as the middle bit sticks out for the camera, and the screen goes back about 130 degrees, which I felt was fine for viewing. The lid felt nice to close as there's a thin rubber bezel around the screen which comes into contact with the main chassis when closed. The laptop alone weighs 2.6 kilos or 5.8 pounds, and goes up to 3.3 kilos or 7.4 pounds with a 240-watt power brick and cables for charging. It does have Type-C charging support though, so you can travel without the larger brick. Just don't expect full performance as that can't supply full wattage. I didn't think it felt too big for a 17-inch gaming laptop. It's still fairly portable. Despite being a gaming laptop, unfortunately there's no mux switch here, which also means no G-Sync, but it does have adaptive sync. The only way to bypass Optimus is to connect an external screen. More on that soon. The 8-bit 1080p panel has alright color gamut for a gaming laptop and decent contrast. The brightness gets close to 360 nits, higher than the 300 that I want to see as a minimum, but this will vary a bit between individual panels. The screen response time wasn't great considering it's got a 360Hz refresh rate, whereafter a 2.78 millisecond response time for transitions to occur within the refresh window, and none of the measured transitions were close to this. The Aorus 17 isn't doing as well compared to other 360Hz screens because there's no overdrive mode available, something the other 360Hz laptops I've tested do have, which gives them an edge. Granted, at the expense of some overshoot and undershoot. Screen response time is a factor that contributes to total system latency. This is the total amount of time between a mouse click and when a gunshot fires on the screen in CSGO, and the result isn't too bad considering there's no mux switch, as disabling Optimus usually improves this. These are some of the strange choices that Gigabyte has made with the Aorus 17. It seems to only be available with a 1080p 360Hz screen, which might sound great for esports gamers, but with a slow screen response time and no mux switch, it's just not going to do as well in those sorts of games compared to other laptops. Not to mention the RTX 3080 Ti paired with a 1080p screen just feels like a bit of a waste, unless you're connecting an external monitor. Just wait till we get to the gaming benchmarks later, because it's not actually that much better compared to the 3070 Ti. Backlight bleed was minor in both of my two laptops. I never noticed it at all, but this will vary between laptops. There's a 720p camera above the screen in the middle, a welcome change from last year's nose cam underneath. And it's got IR for Windows Hello Face Unlock, which worked fast. This is what the camera and microphone look and sound like, and this is what it sounds like while I'm actively typing on the keyboard. The keyboard has per key RGB backlighting, but unfortunately it doesn't light up the secondary key functions, which I always find annoying. If you hold the function key, the keys you can interact with light up white. And this, in combination with the spacebar, can be used to adjust key brightness between two levels. There are a few different RGB lighting effects built in, which can be changed through the Gigabyte Control Center software under the RGB Fusion tab. And the effects themselves can be customized a bit with different speeds and directions. The key brightness can also be adjusted in 10% increments here too. Typing on the keyboard was fine. The keys have a subtle clicky feel. There's no caps lock light, which I found annoying at times. The software does tell you on screen when you change it, but you can't just look at the laptop and know if it's on or off. This also means if you remove the software or use a different operating system like Linux, then you've just got no idea if it's on or off. The right shift was a little short, which may annoy some people, but I only use the left shift so I didn't notice. The power button is above the keyboard in the center and it lights up white with the Aorus logo, with some air ventilation holes on either side. I thought the touchpad was above average. It's fairly large, it feels nice and smooth, and clicks were accurate. The left has an air exhaust vent, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet facing the preferred way so you don't have to lift the machine to unplug, HDMI 2.1 and mini DisplayPort 1.4 outputs, and a USB 3.2 Type-A port. The generation isn't listed on the specs, so I'd assume slower Gen 1. The right has a 3.5mm audio combo jack, a second USB 3.2 Type-A port. Again, the generation isn't listed, so I'd assume slower Gen 1. A Type-C Thunderbolt 4 port, the power input, and there's an air exhaust on this side too. There aren't any ports on the back. There are just a couple of air exhaust vents towards the corners, while the middle has this orange sort of pattern. The single Type-C port on the right can be used to charge the laptop, and it also offers DisplayPort support via the Intel Integrated Graphics. Both the mini DisplayPort 1.4 and HDMI 2.1 outputs connect directly to the NVIDIA discrete graphics low, bypassing Optimus. So this means that you can connect an external screen to either of these two ports to boost performance in games, but that won't work on the Type-C port. We also confirmed that the HDMI port offers G-Sync support, so variable refresh rate, and it supports a 4K external screen at up to 120Hz 8-bit. There are 14 TR6 screws to remove to get inside, and the 6 towards the front are shorter than the rest. Once the screws are out, it was very easy to pry the bottom panel off using the tools linked below the video. Inside we've got the battery down the front, an M.2 storage slot to the left of it and the second above on the right, 2 memory slots in the middle, and Wi-Fi 6E card on the right. Intel 12th Gen supports either DDR4 or DDR5 memory, just not in the same laptop, and Gigabyte have chosen to offer both DDR4 and DDR5 configurations of the Aorus 17. You won't be able to change later though, so if you buy the DDR4 version, you can never use DDR5 memory, and vice versa. Wi-Fi performance was great, one of the better results compared to other gaming laptops that I've tested. The upgradability score is the same as many others. We can upgrade quite a bit here, but I took off half a point from ease of access due to it having uncommon screws. But again, the tools I use linked in the description can open it just fine. The speakers are found underneath towards the front on the left and right sides. I didn't think they sounded good, below average compared to others with basically no bass while sounding tinny. The latency mon results were looking good though. The Aorus 17 is powered by a large 99 watt-hour battery. It's not doing super well compared to most others, lasting for 4.5 hours in my YouTube playback test. Generally, AMD Ryzen-based machines have longer runtime, as shown by the results that dominate the top of the graph. However, there are still a number of other Intel 12th Gen laptops that were able to last longer with smaller batteries than the Aorus. I also ended the game test early with 19% charge remaining as the frame rate dipped to an unusable level, which indicates performance loss at lower charge levels. There seems to be some weird battery drain problem too. We had this laptop fully charged for testing, but then turned it off for 3 to 4 days over a long weekend and left it unplugged from the charger. And by the time we got back to it just a few days later, the battery charge level was on about 77%. I could understand if maybe we accidentally left the laptop asleep or something, but completely turned off, that's no good. Now we also double checked this and left the laptop off for 2 days starting at 100% charge. And after just 2 days it was down to 88%. Now right before this recording I did actually do a third test where I left this laptop off for just 24 hours, because it was all the time I had left. Now interestingly, in that 24-hour period, the battery was still 100% when I turned it back on. So I don't know if this is some weird issue and I'm just going crazy, or if it needs more time to take effect. But I will say that this is something that I have noticed with my personal Gigabyte Aero 17 laptop. Compared to most other laptops, I have really noticed that the battery seems to drain quite significantly after a few weeks of leaving it powered off and unused. Let's check out thermals next. For this, we're focusing on the 3070 Ti configuration. There are 3 heat pipes shared between the CPU and GPU, with 2 fans which bring cool air in through the big air vent towards the back. The Gigabyte Control Center software lets us change between 5 different built-in performance modes. From lowest to highest, we've got power saving silence mode, meeting mode, gaming mode, turbo mode, and creator mode. For each setting preset, you can change things like keyboard brightness, screen white point, and GPU boost. But I've done all testing with these on their defaults. There's also a fan control tab with different fan curves available by default. I haven't customized any of these for testing and again have stuck to the defaults, but this gives you some more flexibility. It's also possible to toggle between these different fan modes by holding the function key and pressing the escape key, which has the fan icon. By default, turbo and gaming modes apply the following overclocks to the GPU, so slightly different overclocks based on the GPU. The temperatures were fine when just sitting there idle, and we're only looking at the 3070 Ti results here, not the 3080 Ti. The rest of the results are from combined CPU and GPU stress tests, which aim to represent a worst-case workload. Creator mode was the warmest, and the CPU was thermal throttling at 90 degrees Celsius. However, turbo mode increases the fan speed, which removes this. The cooling pad I test with, linked below the video, was then able to further lower temperatures by 10 degrees on the CPU. Quite a big dip for such a simple change. These are the clock speeds for the same tests just shown. Creator mode wasn't reaching as high CPU speeds compared to turbo mode as per the blue bars due to the thermal throttling. However, the GPU speed in the green bar was a little higher in creator mode. This seems to be because the Gigabyte software changes from Nvidia's dynamic boost to Gigabyte AI boost, which seems to guarantee the GPU power limit boost rather than having it as opportunistic. This was why creator mode was allowing the GPU to run the highest, at around 113 watts on average. Both the 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti in the Aura 17 max out at 130 watts, but expect up to 115 watts with Gigabyte AI boost or 100 watts with Nvidia's dynamic boost when the CPU is also loaded up. Turbo mode changes to Nvidia dynamic boost, which is why the GPU lowers back to 100 watts or so. However, it instead boosts the CPU higher to 70 watts as a trade-off. This is quite high considering most gaming laptops I typically test limit the processor to 45 to 55 watts or so. Usually the GPU boost is more beneficial for games, however given the Aura 17 only seems available with a 1080p screen, it's possible the higher CPU power may provide more of a benefit, especially for esports games. Here's how an actual game performs with the different performance modes. The top 3 results are basically all the same and definitely within the margin of error, but it would appear that the higher GPU boost in creator mode was giving it a slight edge. At least in this specific game, I wouldn't be surprised if esports titles see bigger boosts due to the higher CPU power limits. In a CPU-only workload like Cinebench, where the GPU is no longer active, we're seeing similar CPU power limits. To be honest, I was expecting to see higher CPU power limits here. For example, we just saw turbo mode can run the CPU at 70 watts with the GPU also sitting at 100 watts. So with no GPU work, you'd expect there to be more CPU headroom, but it's still limited to 70 watts. If the Aura 17 could boost the CPU higher, then we'd be looking at a higher score compared to other laptops. I found it interesting that despite the Aura 17 being physically larger in width, depth, and height compared to the Gigabyte Aero 16, it was behind in the multi-core score. The higher single-core score on the Aero is expected due to the i9's higher single-core turbo boost speed, but for multi-core score, it all comes down to the power limit, which is why the highest result is the same i7 in the Legion 5i Pro, as it can sustain a higher 90-watt TDP. Performance lowers when we unplug the charger and run purely off battery power. The Aura 17 drops back a couple of positions when compared to the same selection of laptops. The 14-core 20-thread chip is now being beaten by 8-core 16-thread Ryzen options, implying those may be more power efficient. That said, the single-core score from the i7 was still ahead of all the AMD options though. The keyboard was around the low 30 degrees Celsius range when just sitting there idle, same as most other laptops. It's much the same with the stress test running in meeting mode. Gaming mode was a little warmer in the center, but the WASD area where you'd be touching is cold. The creator mode is much the same, a little warm in the middle but not hot. And then turbo mode is surprisingly cool even with a heavy workload running. But that's because the fans are very loud. Let's have a listen. Like Gigabyte's Aero 16 I recently covered, the fan would randomly turn on every minute or so when just sitting there idle, which is why there were two different sound levels provided. Meeting mode was quiet when under heavy load, while creator and gaming modes sound about the same. Turbo mode was significantly louder. I definitely want headphones for that. But there is fan control, so you can tune it. Or alternatively, as we saw, a cooling pad could make a big difference while producing far less noise thanks to the big air vent underneath. This is one of the largest I've seen on any laptop. Now let's find out how two different configurations of Aorus 17 actually perform in games and compare against other laptops. We're just going to look at results at 1080p because that's the only screen resolution that the Aorus 17 seems to offer. Cyberpunk 2077 was tested the same on all laptops, and I've got both configurations of Aorus 17 shown by the red highlight. The DDR5 and 3080 Ti configuration was only reaching a 3% higher average FPS compared to the DDR4 and 3070 Ti configuration, or less than 3 FPS, so basically nothing that you're likely to notice in practice. Control is also a GPU heavy game, so it probably doesn't matter a whole lot that neither of these two laptops have a mux switch. I think it mostly comes down to the GPU power limit. Both have the same power limit, and the 3080 Ti was only reaching a 4% higher average FPS compared to the 3070 Ti. The lower wattage 3080 Ti in the Aero 16 was behind both, while higher wattage 3080 Ti laptops were able to do up to 18% better, which really shows how power limit affects FPS. Red Dead Redemption 2 was tested with the game's benchmark, and again there's only a tiny difference between these two laptops here too, with the 3080 Ti reaching a 3% higher average FPS compared to the 3070 Ti configuration. When it comes to the Aorus 17, as far as games are concerned, it doesn't seem worth spending more money for the max spec configuration. The differences between the 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti can be a little larger with different power limits though. You can check out the differences between these two GPUs in way more games at two different resolutions in this video after the review. Here are the 3D Mark results, and like the games, the 3080 Ti machine wasn't that far ahead compared to the 3070 Ti. Now for some content creator tests. DaVinci Resolve was tested with the Puget Systems benchmark, and as a test that relies on the GPU, the 3080 Ti and DDR5 configuration of Aorus 17 was scoring 6% ahead compared to the 3070 Ti and DDR4 version. So a little more difference compared to the games, but not much. Adobe Premiere was also tested with the Puget Systems benchmark, but the difference was far smaller here and basically nothing. The 3080 Ti machine was actually far more inconsistent, scoring lower than the 3070 Ti machine more often than not. This is just how things averaged out after many tests. Unfortunately, we weren't able to run the Puget Systems Adobe Photoshop benchmark on either of these laptops. Just like the Gigabyte Aero 16 that I recently reviewed, it just crashes. Now, I think it's a bit weird that we've had this problem happen on 3 separate Gigabyte laptops and nothing else. So it definitely seems like a Gigabyte issue, but at the same time, I can open Adobe Photoshop and use it perfectly fine. So it seems to just be an issue running that specific benchmark tool. I've also tested SpecViewPerf, which tests out various professional 3D workloads. In most of the tests, there wasn't much difference at all, though some like 3D Studio Max were scoring up to 32% higher with the 3080 Ti. So perhaps double the VRAM is helping out in some tests. Both M.2 slots offer fast PCIe Gen 4 storage, and the 1TB SSD in my Aorus 17 was doing very well for the read speeds. And although the writes were lower comparatively, it's still much higher compared to older Gen 3 drives. Like the Aero 16, I'm really not a fan of Gigabyte's Control Center software. It just feels buggy and unfinished, though there have been some updates over the last few weeks during testing that have fixed some problems. Like the Aero, it still unmutes the sound after every reboot. You mute it in Windows, and the software decides it knows better and changes it. Just annoying stuff like that. By default, both of these laptops came to me with core isolation disabled, but if you decide to go ahead and enable core isolation, which is actually what Microsoft recommends, then the Gigabyte Control Center software just doesn't open at all, which isn't really a great look. Sure, it works fine by default out of the box because they ship it with core isolation off, but the software not running at all with core isolation on just makes it seem like it's not ready for Windows 11. The BIOS might not be as modern looking compared to other brands like Asus, MSI, or Lenovo, but but the core basic functionality is still present, though there's nowhere near as much customization compared to others like MSI's Advanced BIOS. Linux support was tested with Ubuntu 22.04, as Pop! OS 21.10 wouldn't boot. By default, the keyboard, touchpad, Ethernet, Wi-Fi, and speakers worked. The camera sort of worked, but it was showing the infrared view and I couldn't change it, so not really usable by default. The keyboard shortcuts to adjust keyboard brightness and volume worked, but screen brightness adjustment and the escape key fan speed shortcuts did not work. Let's discuss pricing and availability next. This will of course change over time, so refer to those links in the description for updates. At the time of recording, the same 3070 Ti configuration that I focused on in this video goes for $2,100 US, though I couldn't actually find the 3080 Ti option available right now in the US market, so I'm not sure what the difference is. Again, check for sales and updates with the links below the video. Unless the 3080 Ti model is like $100 more or something, personally, I don't think I would consider it. If you're just gaming, then it's clearly not worth it for most people at the native 1080p resolution of the laptop. It might be a different story at a higher resolution, or as we saw in some of the content creator workloads. Here in Australia, right now the 3080 Ti model seems to go for $1,000 Australian dollars more, which is about $700 US. Price aside, and the fact that the 3080 Ti model probably isn't worth it, there's still something strange about the Aura 17. At 17 inches, I can start noticing the pixels at 1080p. I really think they should have offered a 1440p option, but according to the Gigabyte website, it's only available with a 1080p 360Hz screen. Now, you could argue that they've got a 1080p high refresh screen, so obviously they're targeting esports players, right? Well, that argument kind of falls apart pretty quick. Not only is there no overdrive mode resulting in slower screen response time compared to many other laptops, there's also no muck switch, something that I've shown in the past will greatly boost performance in esports titles. So if you're playing those types of games competitively, I'd say it's basically essential. Unless of course you plan on attaching an external screen to one of these ports on the left. Combined with the fact that the RTX 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti configurations barely performed differently in games, I'm just left feeling that both options are suboptimal. I also thought it was a bit strange that they've limited the maximum CPU power limit, considering the smaller and thinner Aero 16 can boost higher. The Aorus has a larger power brick and in theory more space for cooling, so it kind of just feels like a bit of an arbitrary limit that doesn't need to exist. Otherwise, there are other negatives, like poor battery life compared to others. I didn't like the speakers or the Gigabyte software. Pretty much any other laptop control panel software works better than what Gigabyte has here, except for maybe Alienware. Theirs is pretty bad too. That said, I do like the touchpad and typing on the keyboard, though the keyboard did annoy me because the secondary functions don't get lit up. I also liked the port selection, the camera is in a better spot now, and the large open vent underneath means a cooling pad can significantly improve thermals without resorting to loud fan noise. At the end of the day, the Aura 17 can definitely run games perfectly fine and you'll have a great time playing on it. It's just difficult to recommend compared to all the other good laptops out there for similar money. There's a lot of competition right now, and I can't personally say that I would buy one of these laptops, unless the price is extremely competitive and they keep updating that software. Check out why the RTX 3080 Ti isn't worth spending more on compared to the RTX 3070 Ti over here next. I've tested way more games in that one. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel for when I fairly compare DDR4 and DDR5 memory in the same laptop chassis.